All right, everyone. Very, very excited about tonight's show. We did a show last year around this time. It was we had just launched the Ship Chasing YouTube channel. Shawn had just started making the rounds, doing some non-writing content, and it was an electric show. And we said, we need to run this back. We're about to launch into main event draft season. We're about to firm up the Zero RB target list, so we had to do it. The godfather of Zero RB, the fantasy football show, the head maven over at Rotoviz, Shawn Siegele. Thanks for joining us, Shawn.
Well, excited to be with you guys. This should be a blast. Looking to put together this main event team, and from the 9 spot, we have some different kind of fun, crazy options.
That's right. Yes. So we are going to be doing a main event draft live on stream. The 4 of us coming up here tonight. Gretch and Pat and I are wrapping up one of our slow drafts. Ben and Pat, how are you guys doing?
Doing good. Wait, did you say we're drafting our main event tonight?
No, I said we're going to be drafting another main event draft,
like,
but we're doing our slow draft
wrong?
right now. No.
You did say that in a way where I had to remind myself we weren't drafting main event tonight. So I'm with Ben there.
All right. Just to make clear, we are not drafting a main event team tonight. People are asking, when is the next live draft? Check in the show notes down below. There's a link to a tweet that has our full schedule for the rest of the summer. You can get caught up on all of that. I don't know our exact date off the top of my head. But Shawn, how about you? Have you started any main event drafts yet? Any slow drafts, or are you waiting?
I've been waiting so far. I almost got into a couple, but decided to everybody is on the clock, has to make those fast decisions. Ben and I are drafting one of the RB Triflex Dynasty leagues, and it's been a blast moving around, moving down, and then moving back in for Kyler.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. You guys got Kyler?
It's been super fun. We moved back a ton, and then we finally took our first pick. It was DJ Moore in like the 4th, and then we moved back more and more and more. And then we didn't have a lot of our young guys went. So we ended up drafting Ekeler and Rodgers. And then we get an offer to move Ekeler to get into Saquon. So we did that. And then we moved Rodgers and Saquon and got Kyler. So it was all in the 7th round, we got back there. So now we have Kyler, DJ Moore, Elijah Moore, Laviska, and we're on the clock right now. And we're in the 7th round. We only have 4 players, but we have 12 picks coming up, 4 future firsts, 4 future seconds, all sorts of fun stuff going on.
There you go.
Shawn's a wheeler dealer
format, man. Yeah, you gotta have a wheeler dealer. I did one with Leone, and he was the same way. He's just firing off trade offers. I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah, that's how I've been. I'm like, yeah, do it.
How do you actually? How do you manage the wheel and dealing with a co-manager, Shawn? Because part of it too is just firing a lot of stuff off. Are you guys huddling on every single trade offer, or has he given you kind of carte blanche to wheel and deal?
Well, we've had maybe more communication than we were expecting. There have been a lot of opportunities to move up, to move down, and there can be an advantage because if you have a co-owner, then people are maybe not as frustrated with you being on the clock for hours because they know you have to run it by somebody.
And I'll just add, I have sent 3 different emails in a lot of these back and forths that have been like, Shawn, whatever you want to do it. I love all the moves you're making. Everything you're suggesting, don't wait to ask me. But yeah, we've sent maybe 100+ emails back and forth about this.
So Shawn, what are, maybe we start a little bit macro here about how you're feeling about how this entire season's set up. We have fairly established ADP starting to get shook up a little bit from preseason, but yeah, I'm sure you always get the questions every year. Is this a good year for Zero RB? Is this a bad year? What are your macro takes on how this season is shaping up from a draft standpoint?
I like it, which isn't a surprise. But you have, I think, now 3 wide receivers who can legitimately take in the first round. And, we went through a little bit of a period there where if you're not going to take a running back in the first round, it's harder to make the case that those wide receivers are going to be league winners for you. Right. The flip side of that is Christian McCaffrey is the only clear first-round running back right now. Now, there are some other guys you can take there. I mean, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, still extremely elite talents and situations that could be okay. But really then it comes down to Pat's guys. Do you want to draft Antonio Gibson number 5 overall?
But you don't have to. So that's nice. But Shawn, I love you. You have this this way of delivering extremely hot takes in ways that don't sound hot. You just said Dalvin Cook is a borderline first-round pick, which is not consensus. People are afraid to question him as even the consensus number 2. There's been almost no discussion about what the number 2 pick should be. And even me, I'm like often just taking Dalvin Cook because that's the only way you get Dalvin Cook exposure. So I do it. But I agree with you. I think he's not nearly as locked in as it first appears. And, he probably needs to do something he didn't do last year to repeat. Like, I don't think he can get back to what he was doing fantasy points wise in exactly the same way. It's just too thin.
While we're talking about the first round and those running backs, I know you were very high on Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, we then have the injuries with Wentz and Quentin Nelson, but now it sounds like they're going to be good for week 1. The ADPs, at least on Underdog, have not adjusted. You can still get, Taylor 6-7 spots behind where he was going pre those injuries. Are you back to being as high on JT as you were before, or is there still kind of room for concern there?
When people are coming back from the injuries that are starting the season already very questionable, it makes me a little bit worried. And the thesis for him being a 102 to 105 guy requires some of the same things that you require from Cook, where, he's going to have a very high rush EP, and then he's going to have to blow away expectations in terms of fantasy points over expectations. So then you're into this mix where you want to be a little bit more careful. And then obviously for FFPC, in a variety of contests, you have that bye, and you have to decide, are we comfortable being in that week without our first round pick?
So it's more about even the way the schedule is breaking for FFPC than the specific kind of offensive injury concerns?
I think so. In many cases, we've gotten a big discount. I think that if you go Barkley, Taylor at the turn or in the back half of the round, then, you have a chance this year to build a double elite running back lineup that you can then go receiver forever after that. And it gets pretty fun, right? But, you're taking 2 guys who could both be completely worthless. And, maybe then still your wide receivers can bail you out. But those questions make this a more exciting year than so many. And so then, kind of go back again. Are these guys higher upside and at the same time safer than an Antonio Gibson, for example?
Well, shout out to Davis Maddock, who walked into a room with Shawn Siegele and Ben Gretch and came out with 2 running backs as the first 2 picks. So those 2 running backs specifically, that is will forever be impressive.
Yeah, Davis, the low key boomer, got us to take running backs. God, every time. Talk to that guy these days. What happened to you, Davis? I hope you're watching.
Davis,
Sean,
go ahead, Pat. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to ask Sean about the question that you just asked. Like, where do you stand with those guys and Gibson? I know that there's red flags, but there's red flags with Gibson too. Like, we're projecting a lot of this. It's like a lot of our hopes and dreams are in Antonio Gibson right now, and he might just not get the role. You kind of low-key compared him to Joe Mixon when I asked you what your reasoning was for why you had him projected to be a first-round pick next year. It sounded like you were saying partly because you think the community will be behind this guy, even if he has like a good but not great year. How do you view Barkley, Taylor, and Gibson, and anyone else kind of in that range?
I think that those 2 guys are the second and third biggest talents at the running back position. And anytime you can get that level of talent, I think that you have to consider doing it and probably do it as many times as it works in there, right? And so you've got that element.
So Pete's refreshing.
Freakish athleticism. And then you have this element where he could be this dual threat guy. I'm concerned that we don't know for sure that he's that level of talent, and there's a ton of projection in his receiving numbers. If he doesn't get those, he's really more of a 4th round pick. And so
right,
the price is still an issue with him. I would rather risk it on guys like Edwards-Helaire, like Swift, although can you take someone with a groin injury in the first 6 or 7 rounds? So, those elements start to come into play there.
Yeah. Gretch, are you getting worried about Swift? I know we all had started to get pretty excited about him collectively, and this is definitely a buzzkill.
Sorry, I wasn't even paying attention. I haven't heard the news on Swift. I'm too busy laughing at Davis popping up in the chat going, are we talking running backs? I heard someone say back-to-back running backs.
We're telling you to stop aggressively drafting Swift if you have been, because he has a groin injury that could be massively concerning.
That's not good. Massively since when? Today?
It's been lingering.
I don't think. Yeah, it's just been lingering. It's the same. I feel like it's a minor red flag. I don't think this is like a major thing, but I guess anytime any running back has any kind of.
Did Shawn bring it up? Because we know how Shawn likes to,
I think Shawn decided he wants to hammer. He's trying to get Jamar Jefferson on his teams. Shawn's doing a dynasty team with you, and he needs to talk you into Jamar Jefferson. So now Swift's hurt.
I think he's trying to temper. I think he's trying to temper the rise on DeAndre Swift too. Like, we got to be careful. He's getting a little too pricey.
That might be right.
Yeah, that's Davis is experiencing what we all did, all smashing Swift after listening to you guys talk about him, and now we're all backpedaling on it. So Shawn, what else? What are the kind of things when you're working on the zero RB list in the preseason that you're kind of, because the whole thing right now is what's signal, what's noise. I feel like the Miami Dolphins running back situation is one where it feels like collectively we decided this is actual signal here, and Malcolm Brown is going to be fairly involved. How do you kind of parse both training camp reports, preseason stuff, as it impacts your kind of decision making there?
Well, anytime that you have guys who, weren't drafted super early, aren't huge, aren't blazing fast, even if they've been very good, all it takes is a couple plays, you get stuffed, somebody else gets in, and then you're in a committee. And so that's one of the reasons why, you have the running back dead zone. One of the reasons why, you want to be concerned about a David Montgomery, even when he finished hot last season against the soft schedule, because when you're not an elite talent, it doesn't take too much to fall back into a situation where now your role doesn't work. And so I think the flip side of that for the zero RB guys, you're looking for these backups who have more talent, a backup like a Penny, for example, who, if he ever was healthy for a while, then you've got a first round guy in an offense that wants to run a ton. And then you're just looking at price as well. I mean, one of the reasons why zero RB works is you're getting great prices on these guys who are NFL talented running backs. And so you look through there, and when you have profiles that pop out as very little would have to happen for them to say we had a midseason draft, anybody that you can envision being a 4th or 5th round pick, and you're getting them in the 13th, 14th round, I mean, you got to be loading up on all of those profiles.
Shawn, I have a very specific yes or no question. If you're way beyond Rashad Penny, Marlon Mack's off the board, would you take Malcolm Brown at the end of the 17th round?
No.
So, okay, who do, if you want to bet against Myles Gaskin and his price tag, who are you doing that with?
Well, do I have the Dolphins game right? Wasn't it Achman who actually looked good in that game and looked very good when Gaskin was out last season?
Ben's asking because we literally just took Malcolm Brown. He was the one who didn't want to take my friend.
Trying to talk about his ledge.
Achman's off the board. We took Malcolm Brown as running back 71. Achman off the board. Quadri Allison was off the board. So I don't know. To me, at a certain point, like, I know we want guys that are talented, but this is like, I'll go on Davis' show and we'll talk about this. We just want snaps eventually. Me, Davis, and Leone at some point stop caring about talent. My line is a little bit later, but at a certain point, like, if the Dolphins want to, give this guy starts, which I don't know why they're doing that, and they may not do that, but there's a chance that they do that. And the thing about Brown is that even, last year we saw he was getting receptions, he's getting goal line carries, and he's a big dude and he can pass block, and Gaskin was terrible in the goal line last year. So, if we get, like, the comparison that I was thinking through with him is, like, it's a very different physical comparison. It's not as athletic, but Jerick McKinnon last year, kind of in this range, you're getting like 2-3 starts, and that I feel like is kind of helpful. And if he doesn't end up getting the snaps we think he might get, then he's the easiest cut ever because I don't believe in him at all. So it's not going to be a roster clogger for us.
That was the I'm just being a dick now, but that was the compelling part. I mean, it's 17-10. We're probably going to cut this guy either way, so it doesn't really matter.
Brown is one of those guys where it's a little bit harder for me to see a scenario in a managed league where you actually do put him into the starting lineup. I mean, those things are definitely true. When you have the touchdown potential, I mean, he's a good pass blocker. Whether he's going to get receptions is the question on top of that. But even guys who maybe have a worse situation from a high value touch perspective, you could see a game where they would go out and get 25 touches and would kind of fall into the touches that matter. And you could start them where maybe Brown, that's not the case. Although the Dolphins are weak enough at running back, maybe it is.
So Shawn, because I feel like there's, when you're looking at the zero RB targets and specifically that late, we all have the high upside premium guys we like. We took on this team, AJ Dillon and Tony Pollard. Everyone's sold on them. When you get further, we know the pass catching archetype, the Nyheim Hines, the James Whites. It sounds like, I'm guessing you prefer those guys if you're just looking for touches versus the early down projected touches, or from, say, like the older players who might get work early, like a Malcolm Brown. Is that where you're looking when it gets super late in those drafts?
Yeah, because I do like to have kind of a balance of the profiles where you have the guys who you think are actually the more talented back on the roster, who are backups, who could win the job outright, or if the starter gets hurt, they score a huge number of points. And then you want some of those handcuffs who maybe don't have that talent, but you could see a situation within the context of the offense where they score a lot of points. But then you also want those pass catching guys to kind of round it out. And if you do a really poor job last year of getting the other players, then you can play a Hines, you can play a McKissick, and they're going to do all right for you.
Yeah. It feels to me like this year the pass catching options like that are more limited in years past. I mean, it's like Hines, White, McKissick. I'm sure there's one or two others that I'm forgetting, but when I'm looking for that archetype, Gio Bernard, it kind of like dries up after those 4 or 5.
Yeah, I agree. It feels way thinner.
But they're way less expensive. Like James White, was it last year or the year before, was like in like the 8th, 9th round? Like there's been some like weird prices on these guys at times. I guess it was kind of the Hines effect where it's like whoever had the good year at the pass catcher then gets priced up above the other pass catchers when they're all pretty much the same. Ben's always talking about, getting the cheaper guy rather than, paying a premium for one of these pass catchers. But I agree that it's thin, but I feel like it's nice because you can just sort of sit back and take whoever does fall.
Yeah, like Cohen has been up there in the single digits. White has in the last few years. We don't have one this year that's up there that's like just a clear pass catcher for whatever reason. Danny Woodhead years ago. What'd you say?
Myles Gaskin.
Austin Ekeler going in round 1. No, we love Ekeler. He's an amazing talent. Yeah, there aren't a ton, but Bernard and White are so cheap that it's hard to not get them if you do have that as something that you're considering.
Yeah. Where are you at on Ekeler? Because, if he was to get a goal line roll, my God.
Yeah, I mean, the Alvin Kamara potential is right there. I mean, if that offense takes even a little bit of a step forward, I mean, they had Herbert last year. He was astonishing, and yet they managed to not score the way that you would expect. If they rectify that, and he's in there, I mean, you're looking at Alvin Kamara, and to a certain extent, the drama with the backups almost encourages you to think it's just going to end up being Ekeler, right? Because if Jackson is having problems now, if Josh Kelly is someone that the coaches have to go out there and prop up, I mean, how can you not use your guy who's a star? And so if you need to take him out on the low value touches, do that, use him. I mean, the Detroit Lions would like to take Barry Sanders out at the goal line, and for that reason, they were terrible. It's like, use your stars on the touches that matter.
Yeah. So who have been kind of then, when you find yourself taking a running back at that 1-2 turn, that's generally where Eckler's going. We've talked about you're having to reach and pay a premium for Gibson there. Who is the pick there for you if you aren't taking a wide receiver?
I have quite a few teams with Barkley or with Taylor at that point. And I think that you balance some of the risk by, Devontae Adams before we knew Aaron Rodgers was there was a no-brainer. Now you do still see either Hill or Diggs occasionally slide into those spots. And I think that if you match one of them with one of these star running backs, then you're looking at a team where you actually have two guys and have both positions covered where they could average 25 points a game during that sort of 3-week stretch. I mean, they're not likely to, but they could. And so then you have this sort of double upside in terms of winning the $500,000. It's also something where Darren Waller is just extraordinary at this point. So I think that, you have this element where people want the tight end premium, and Travis Kelce and Darren Waller, there's no question what they give you in terms of having almost an extra starting person in your lineup. But I think we can also just look how good Waller actually is. And that, obviously he wouldn't be going there if it weren't for the tight end element, but he's a star who is a legitimate person to consider just on talent.
And so I take it based on that, are you Kelce 102 in FFPC?
I have been mostly. It goes back and forth with Cook. And even I think you can take one of the wide receivers that high to get a little bit of a different build if you would like.
Right. And then Darren Waller, is he slotting in there for you at like 105, 106?
He would be.
Gotcha.
How big do you think the gap is between Waller and Kittle?
Very small.
Kittle is I think one of the best values in the first 2 rounds.
Kittle's an instant value. We can't stop drafting. He goes to the late second. You can,
except for the draft I did with you. You wanted to limit your exposure. Then the next draft, I saw you took him again because you were like,
well, because we drafted 5 spots later.
Yeah. I was like, God damn it.
I was saying, I have Kelce and Waller really close. Are we? Kittle is somebody. So you guys have a lot of Kittle. How is that offense going to play out? I know that we've had this conversation a little bit in the past, but Aiyuk and Samuel are so good. Do they have
slow play us on Kittle and get us to get all excited about our exposure, and then now you're not
yeah,
on
he
Kittle?
did. Now it's gonna smack it down. I didn't mean Kittle. I meant Waller. Kittle sucked. Oh, now we feel bad.
Do you have 100%? 100. Are all the main event teams so far?
No, we passed. So Ben, now you get to be happy. The one we don't have is because it was at Ben. And Ben's smart.
I told you guys not to take Kittle.
We've been doing some OT leagues, and Kittle has been going in the first round, and so I think that very much ship chasing approved.
Yeah, Kittle is going in the late second. We took him in the earliest we took him was 202, but generally we've been getting him in like 208, 209. My thinking with the crowded stuff is I'm least concerned about it with the tight end. Because Kittle's he's only had 6 touchdowns. That's his career high. The offense could score a lot more points. It'd be nice. So I think he has upside for a career high in touchdowns, and he's not been a volume guy. The tight end premium, it's for the receptions, so you do want the volume, but he's been hyper efficient. The offense could be, I think, even more efficient with better quarterback play, and the tight end is the spot where we need volume the least, really. So, and also, I do think Kittle's a better real-life tight end than Darren Waller. I think he might be a better tight end than Travis Kelce. I think, if you talk about talent, there was no doubt in my mind on the talent with George Kittle. So that's another thing where I have a little bit of a hard time, getting that worried about Samuel and Aiyuk as far as the talent goes. As high as I am on Aiyuk, I think Aiyuk is going to be a star, and I think Debo is very, very talented. I don't think they're as good at what they do as Kittle is what he does. And so that also keeps me bullish on Kittle.
Shawn, one thing that I think has also led us to so much Kittle, even aside from who he is as a player, is just, again, that general construction of liking the elite tight end build in the FFPC. Kittle just happens to be the third in a tier break there. Our team with Ben, we ended up taking Hawkinson. I know there's some love for Kyle Pitts in that range. You can even get Andrews. But I guess what I'm asking, what is your ideal structure right now in the main event, just from a position standpoint? Is it getting one of those elite tight ends, or are you comfortable waiting on it?
The price for them, and that's the argument I think for Kittle, where if you really want to have a first round pick plus a tight end, as opposed to an either or. The best structure, especially if you're stuck in the second half of drafts where you're drafting from way behind when you're in the second half, then I think the best setup is to have Hawkinson, because there's so many indications that he's ready to emerge at that level of the top three guys. And you have the quarterback concerns, but how much of that might have actually been some little things that were going on with the Rams? Goff has gotten some decent buzz out of Lions camp. He actually played pretty well several years ago. Probably not that guy anymore. But if you're facing the situation in round 3 where you have this big tier break at wide receiver in the middle of the round, and you no longer have access to those top guys, and you can get Hawkinson there, then you actually have first and second round picks plus Hawkinson, and the chance that he makes the jump to being this first round tight end next year. And I think that in some ways the ceiling is just so high because the volume could be crazy. Now, can you be even remotely efficient if the defense is quadruple teaming you because there's nobody else and DeAndre Swift is on the sidelines with his groin injury and it's just 3 plays and punt every time? I mean, that's the tricky part, right? But I mean, I think that you have to structure it with that upside in there, especially considering what you're dealing with at the wide receiver position.
So we're geniuses, because that's what we did in our main event. Shawn, I knew that I was going to go to Hawkinson. I want to ask, you were kind of down on Kittle. You said Waller and Kelsey were close. If we're doing tiers, I imagine it's Kelsey and Waller, then a little bit of a tier break. Is Kittle in a different tier than Hawkinson, or is Hawkinson in that tier with Kittle for you? So I think that's an interesting way of thinking of it. And would they then be ahead of Pitts and the rest, or would you also have Pitts up there? How would you, just off the top of your head?
Well, Pitts is just a massive wild card, right? I mean, if he comes out basically playing wide receiver, and you're not going to be Justin Jefferson, but we know that the receivers are making an impact in year 1. You're going to have multiple wide receivers who are in that range where you want them in your starting lineup. If you can do that at the tight end position with the premium and do it in an offense that should be, reasonably efficient. Yeah, I would put Pitts and Hawkinson in that same group with Kittle, because we talk all the time about just betting on talent. And Ben, obviously, you and I did the show on that. We've talked with Pat and Pete about it before. The price, though, we're also trying to be price sensitive on some of these guys. And I'm not worried about the prices for those Bengals players. I'm not worried about the prices for the Cowboys players. But when you're looking at a rookie QB who is a run QB, and you're looking at the prices for guys where, we see all the buzz about CeeDee Lamb, probably justified. We see all the buzz about Tee Higgins, probably justified. But there are a lot of people saying that Brandon Aiyuk is about to become one of the top 2 or 3 wide receivers in the entire NFL. And if that's the case, and if Deebo Samuel is actually the best fit for what Lance is going to do this year as opposed to 2022, then this combination of volume and price does get a little bit tricky. Now, if I ended up on teams with George Kittle, I would be excited about that. There may be a little bit of a gun-shy element for me too with some of the injuries, knowing that, I've had a lot of Rob Gronkowski through the years. And when you have that level of production and then injured, it crushes your team. It's pretty heartbreaking. If you're trying to work around to maybe some players where you don't have some of those things in the past, there are a combination of elements with that. But yeah, the 49ers should be the most exciting team in the NFL. I'm interested to see what they do. And, if they're the highest scoring team in football, then all of those guys can get their points.
Do you have, when you take those early tight ends, say those top 4 or 5 we were just discussing, do you still try to prioritize a high upside second tight end on those builds, or you kind of feel comfortable heading into the season with just the one, and then if a guy emerges on the waiver wire, maybe go for that?
I like the 2, especially in tight end premium, because you do have a little bit of that flex potential. Now, it's not as dynamic as it is in best ball, where you're just automatically sliding those points in when they hit. But you have the protection, you have the flex option with it there, and some of these guys, are going to make the leap. I think that in some ways we've almost gotten a little bit unlucky at the tight end position. One of the things that people talk about every year is, oh, it's deep, and then the season starts, and it's like, no, it's not, because those guys they weren't as good as we talked about. And then all of these volume situations where you project it out doesn't work for the tight ends. But I think that we're going to get some leaps from your Hawkinsons, your Fants. Cole Kmet is somebody that at his price should be on almost every team because of what he could do in that one scenario where the Bears are good and he takes the next step, right? So I would mix up who it is, but definitely try and get that second tight end in there.
You mentioned Noah Fant. I feel like the Broncos are one of the biggest riddles because almost all of their skill position players are having great camps and great preseason. We saw KJ Hamler flash. They say he has the wide receiver 3 job locked up. Sutton's recovering well. Judy's breaking ankles every time they show a highlight of him. And then Noah Fant is a guy you're high on. You talk about kind of the volume situation with the 49ers. That's where the piece of the pie could be very big versus Denver, where we have questions. So how are we able, obviously price adjusted, but how are you thinking about the Broncos skill position players in the context of the overall offense?
There, I think it's going to break out in a situation where some of those guys bust on you and you have to have a team that's built to handle that. And then some of them, I think 1 or 2 of them are going to just be absolute league winners. I do think that the volume that they have is going to be much, much higher than the 49ers. The efficiency may be much, much lower. Although, Teddy Bridgewater, he limited the Panthers last year, but not to the point where those guys didn't score fantasy points. And could this Broncos team be even not just more talented, but significantly more talented than that Panthers team? I mean, you're talking about Hamler winning the number 2 job. Unless Sutton gets back and really starts to get confident again, I mean, Hamler's going to be the number 2 there. And so, I mean, you've got a lot of fantasy points that are coming out of those guys.
So if I'm reading behind,
go ahead, Ben. More talented than a DJ Moore team? Come on, Shawn. And Robbie Anderson, who we know you love.
Yeah,
that's disrespectful to DJ Moore.
It is a bit disrespectful, and to Robbie. I'm assuming Christian McCaffrey was hurt for that. In his 5 games, he's also angry with you.
Yeah, so when McCaffrey's in there, probably a little better.
Hang on, I'm not going to let this. Of everything I heard, it sounds like you're way down on Courtland Sutton relative to the market if Hamler's passing him.
Well, it's a situation where Sutton is now priced to where he could be an absolute winner for you. Ben and I talk about this a lot, trying to figure out how we want to play the Broncos. And it's a tricky element, but I do think that the people coming off of some of these injuries, we want to be pretty concerned about and just price sensitive to again. And, we have Saquon Barkley, who should be the 102, right? And instead is a 2nd round pick because of where he is. Courtland Sutton, it sounds like, is in at least as bad a situation, if not worse. And your options are greater at the wide receiver position in that range. So you have to be careful about drafting him, especially in a situation where, if Barkley is actually ready for week 1, I mean, he's going to be a league winner. If Sutton is ready, then it could still be Jeudy, Hamler, and Fant. And so you have some concerns there. And there are a lot of different ways that Sutton could lose. The way that he wins is just that he comes back and he's the guy that he was before, where he's this big athletic target. And if the offense is better, he can be more efficient. If teams are having to cover Jeudy, having to respect Hamler, how do you deal with Courtland Sutton if he's the guy he was a couple of years ago?
Pete, I think it's funny that you picked that up because in this dynasty, we spent a lot of time talking about Jeudy and Claypool, and I was trying to drill in with Shawn because Shawn's very high on Jeudy. I haven't been as high, but I got to that exact point, and I was like, I probably spent 1,000 words over multiple emails trying to figure out what the hell was going on with this Courtland Sutton valuation. It's like, why do you hate Courtland Sutton so much?
But I definitely get it when you put it that way. How do you? I know you're super high on Tee Higgins. How do you rank the 2nd-year wide receivers, Aiyuk, Claypool, and Jeudy? Because those 3 are all going in a similar pocket of drafts. And you can generally have whichever one of them you want in the early 5th. If you want, the market has kind of decided that it's Aiyuk, Claypool, Jeudy, but I'm curious what your ranks are.
Well, it looks like Aiyuk is the best player, but he's in the worst situation. And so I think he's the best dynasty selection. I pick him in redraft from time to time. I picked him in the Apex League the other day because I think he's a fun player to have some exposure to. But, I mean, he's probably too expensive relative to some of those other guys. Jeudy and Claypool was interesting because Claypool obviously had the efficiency. Blair's done some great numbers on how some of those rookie year elements really do give us some information about year two. I think that we also have to understand, though, that the collegiate numbers actually still do have a pretty large predictive element for year two. And Jeudy's college resume, obviously far, far superior to Claypool. And then some of his peripherals last season, again, were absolutely fantastic. You take away some of those drops, and Jeudy's going in like the 4th round, right? And so you have this opportunity here. You have this sort of one moment, I think, where you can draft him below where he's going to go for the rest of his career. Now, again, there's a scenario where it doesn't work out because their quarterback play is so bad and the other targets are so good, and you say, well, I mean, he's annihilating everybody in practice, but then you go to an actual game and you've got to play against defenses that are scheming to take away your terrible quarterbacks or to give them trouble and then take you away. And suddenly you're like, well, it's a disappointing season again. And you could see some Deontay Johnson action where if he drops a couple of passes to start the season, it's just human nature. I mean, how do you not start to get the yips? I mean, nobody gets open in the NFL like Deontay Johnson. And yet, if you start to drop the ball, you could even get benched for a while to try and, either as punishment or to give you a break, depending on how the coach wants to play it. So there are some elements like that, but I think Jeudy has to be the guy because Claypool made all of those big plays, and yet there's still tons of reasons to believe Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster are better. And so, the way that works out, I think that, and there's some element too, to where you want to make sure that you're taking the best prices on guys in the different scenarios. And if you're getting the prices that you get on Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster, then you have some other ways to play that. Now, I mean, you can make the same argument with Courtland Sutton, but the injury for me is an issue there.
Yeah, can't you say Sutton Hamler could theoretically be better than Jeudy? I mean, Jeudy was very inefficient. He was like the 6th least efficient player by, fantasy points over expectation over at Rotoviz at wide receiver in the entire league in terms of cumulative, fantasy points over expectation. There's like a few really bad receivers behind him, and like no one else that gets drafted reasonably highly. It is really interesting to hear that if he would have just caught a few more of those drops, then we'd have a whole different situation. But the other thing I'll say about Jeudy is he's the 6th worst there, and I brought this up a while back. One of his biggest highlights last year was a touchdown against the Jets on a Thursday night game where he like elevated against a defender, missed the ball, it bounced off a helmet, and like still stayed in this area where he was able to bring it in and score that like 50-yard touchdown. Now, that was thrown from, what was the dude's name? Brett Rippon. Like, I mean, he was playing with some terrible quarterbacks, but I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting. Like, he could have been even worse from an efficiency standpoint. Like, that was one of his most efficient plays of the year. So, I don't know. I'm kind of interested. I think your note that if Jeudy would have caught some more passes, he'd be going a lot higher is very well taken. But I'm concerned about that negative efficiency.
The other thing that I think does come into play a little bit, and we have to be really skeptical about the things that we hear out of camp, especially when you hear it about, super late round picks or about players who have really not been good in the past. But when you hear someone who was in all likelihood the best player out of this group of 4 Alabama wide receivers that the NFL has said these are all top 15 guys, and then he comes out for his second year and people are saying, I mean, he's so far and away the best player on the field for the Denver Broncos. And that is information that does matter to us within the context of the volume that he was able to generate from in terms of all the different peripherals that he had last season, and then just the normal jump to year 2. I mean, one of the things that you do want to do, you want to have the Higgins, the Aiyuks, the Lambs. Those guys are going to become stars, and even if the ability to beat ADP is just by 6 to 12 spots, if you're beating ADP in the second, third, fourth rounds, you're beating it in a range where, I mean, you're beating it because you're a superstar. So you'll still take that. But we also want to have exposure to guys like Jeudy, like Jalen Reagor, who disappointed, but they could have this big bounce back season in year 2, and they're not super expensive. So, maybe even more than a Jeudy, you want to have that Reagor exposure, but we want to get those guys all up and down our draft who were really good in college, and now we're heading into this year 2 volume jump. If they execute from a skill perspective, it's just almost impossible for them not to be winners for you.
I did want to ask you about DeVonta Smith because, he did outproduce Jeudy when they were together in 2019. And Jeudy leaves, Ruggs leaves, and he has this absolutely insane senior season. Was drafted the highest of all of these guys, right? Struggling with a bit of an injury now, but assuming, he's healthy, I was curious, where you stand on him in redraft, because he is a bit more expensive than I had anticipated him being. Believe he's still going above where CeeDee Lamb was going last year, so he's fairly expensive.
He's another one where I think you want some exposure, but when you have an offense that is trying to kind of figure out what it's doing, and you have a receiver who does have some at least mild red flags in terms of being a very small guy, if he's not able to practice, which he hasn't been, then you're looking at this potential slow start. So we know that some of these guys are going to come out and are going to score a gigantic number of points down the stretch. They're going to help you in the playoffs. We're seeing more of that from the wide receivers in addition to always seeing it from the rookie running backs. But the price there makes it very tricky because there are a lot of other options. So do you want to take somebody who's going to give you a slow start when you're drafting him in a range that he really should probably be a starter for you the first, 2, 3, 4 weeks of the season? It is important to, we talk about zero running back and how it's going to hammer down the stretch. It's going to give you these ultimate lineups. We want to make sure we don't build in so much downside for the first month that we're playing from way behind. Because, getting out to that 3-1, 4-0 start, or even if you get unlucky with the head-to-head, having the point totals where you're right in there, there are so many more things you can do than if you're really chasing it.
You mentioned exposure, Shawn, and I'm curious how you think about that, especially over a different volume of drafts. Your exposures and targets are a lot different if you're doing, a couple drafts versus if you're doing 10 versus if you're doing 30. Are you... we generally like these cohorts and baskets of players. Are you purposefully diversifying in drafts, or when you're on the clock and that guy, Jerry Jeudy, staring you down the barrel, are you just clicking accept every time and just want to push that edge?
Yeah, I don't. When I'm trying to get exposure to people, I'm trying to make sure I get enough. Very rarely that I'm pulling back. One of the things that's nice, and I think one of the reasons why people think the wide receiver is so deep, is that there is a couple round range, say round 3 to round 6, that is pretty loaded. Now, I mention all the time that you only get to take one player in each round. So the fact that those rounds are loaded doesn't mean that you could actually go in a different direction and still come out ahead. I mean, you've got to be hammering all the way through if you want to get there. But you do have some different options in rounds 3 through 6. So I think it's almost difficult to get so overweight to where you'd be disappointed if a Jeudy comes to you, because, you just need to get as much as you can.
Gotcha. So you're more thinking of, you have the thresholds of guys that you want to get. One thing we found ourselves is we haven't had a chance to really get Higgins in our drafts because he's now going in such a specific range. We've been getting all these late picks. And so when you're not in the middle of the rounds to scoop him, we just haven't been getting him. And then we have to ask ourselves, are we reaching for him at, the early 4th to lock him up? And you're also having to pass on some really good players. How are you handling that? Because I know you have Higgins incredibly high to where, based on that, he would be a value in the early 4th. Are you still trying to play the ADP game there, or are you going and getting your guys?
Yeah, it's tricky because I do have Higgins in round 2 in terms of my rankings. And I've had him there all off season. And yet my ownership percentage is not that high because I am trying to get him at, say, only overpaid by like 6 slots, not overpaid by 18 slots. And I don't know if it's an element where do a lot of leagues of people who listen to the various shows or bad luck, but I don't know how his ADP is where it is because I've never seen him make it to where he's.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had no shot of getting him really. And as Pete's saying, it's partly due to our draft slots, but when we're in the early part of the draft, then he goes, we don't have to reach now because we can get him in the early 5th. Nope, doesn't come back.
Real quick, a lot of anyone who's shocked in the Discord, please get yourself a Rotoviz sub and go look at Shawn ranks. It's been what I stare at all offseason. If you didn't know that Shawn has Tee Higgins there in the second, you need to get a Rotoviz sub and you need to check out his ranks. It will make you think about fantasy football in a different way. Anyways, back to our previous discussion here.
Tee Higgins is very good. that was the end.
I wanted to ask about DJ Chark. When we were talking about Sutton, he came to mind, as someone who's like potentially very mispriced, unclear which way though, and it might be that he's overpriced given the latest, but he does drop to the 7th round in some of these drafts. You can certainly still see him paying off in a big way there, but on the other hand, does he end the year as a starter in Jacksonville? So it's getting a little scary. We've seen Urban Meyer make some trades, shake some things up. We know he's not afraid to do that. So wanted to get your thoughts on him.
Yeah, Ben and I were talking about him earlier today too, in relation to Laviska and where to take him in Dynasty. And our decision obviously was just to reach by multiple rounds. But I
know how that goes.
Roll the clip.
I was pretty encouraged about how the early training camp went. I know there are different narratives that are playing out there, but obviously Meyer came in and wanted to act like, okay, well, people are going to do it my way, and I can fix and I understand everything that went wrong with Jacksonville last year. And one of the main things that went wrong was that DJ Chark hadn't lifted enough weights. And so we're going to be a playoff team this year by sending him to the weight room. And we did. And then he came back and now he's awesome. And I fixed him and we didn't even have to have practice yet. So that seemed like it pointed in a positive direction. And then, Chark is injured. So you never want to let Marvin Jones get this opportunity to go in and be the number 2 receiver, because he will sit in there behind the superstar, make some long catches, and then people will talk about how he's a legitimate NFL starter, which,
Well, they might not know, but Shawn has a deep and long conflicted relationship with Marvin Jones.
I do. The Marvin Jones hype is starting to build after that stuff. To me, it's like, could Marvin Jones be a small win on his ADP? I could totally see that. But we know who Marvin Jones is. He's going to give us like 3 games this year where he has 2 touchdowns, and he's going to blank you almost the rest of the season. That's what you're getting out of Marvin Jones. Maybe a little bit better with Trevor Lawrence, but I mean, Stafford was good.
Just let the hype build, man. Just let him get excited. This is like the only good ADP shift for us all offseason. Everything else has been sharp. Like, let's just let Marvin Jones. Third round, take him. Go for it. Number one, Jacksonville.
Number one, Jacksonville.
So,
gotta scoop those number 1 wide receivers.
On the Laviska stuff, Shawn, one of the things that came out of preseason was he wasn't playing in the 2 wide receiver sets. He was only playing in the 3 wide out of the slot. Do we have any volume concerns for Laviska? What are the paths to his ascension or slowing that?
Yeah, so I think that the hope with him is that he is this massive talent, because there are going to be a lot of problems with Jacksonville, right? I mean, they're going to run some squirrely plays. You're going to have Trevor Lawrence, I think, struggling to be like Burrow and like Herbert last season. They're going to do a lot of run plays if they can. They're going to do a lot of dump offs to ETN. They'll probably take those shots to Marvin Jones that end up in punting, because once you've thrown one of those plays in, if it doesn't work, then you're off the field. There'll be some issues, but at the same time, I mean, if you've got these AJ Brown comps, if you've got these highlights that just go on for ages, where he's thrown 11 guys to the side and is just kind of jogging down the field by himself because the defense is just in tatters, then you have to have some exposure to that. He's kind of the luxury pick for me, where I feel like the talent is there. I want to have him. He's fun. I think that in this dream scenario, he goes next year where AJ Brown is going, and you win the $500,000. If you're wrong, you need to have structured your roster in such a way that he's on your bench and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And that is that even at his price, if you're drafting him in 0 RB builds, you are getting him as your 5th or 6th wide receiver versus having to go ahead.
So something we talked about, Shawn and I, today when we took him, is even if you're wrong on Laviska, he's not going to be a massive loss. It just doesn't feel like that at all. I mean, he's not even going to be a small loss necessarily. It's probably still like a small win. I mean, I don't know. I got really hyped in the preseason game when they came out and threw two quick passes to him right around the line of scrimmage and said, hey, you're a yak god, go do it. Those are free catches. That's what he's going to be good at. And on top of that, they've been talking all offseason about using him more down the field and all of those things, which I do think we will see a higher ADOT and some more pass volume down the field and the opportunity to earn, targets down the field. But if they're going to throw him quick hitters too and give him a couple free receptions a game, like he's going to catch enough balls. He's going to be fine. He's not going to be he's probably going to be a small win at his cost, even if he's not a massive hit. The question is just, does he have the massive ceiling? Right.
One thing that I was encouraged by, and this is I believe one snap, so grain of salt. But while he was on the field only in 3 wide receiver sets, he did play on the outside for one of those snaps. So someone else is in the slot, he's kicked out. So he was not exclusively playing out of the slot, which I think is nice to see. Because with this guy, I'm always worried that he's going to get pigeonholed into something. He's kind of at first he was going to get pigeonholed into the Percy Harvin thing. And now I was worried he's going to get pigeonholed into just a pure slot receiver. So the fact that he's getting mixed in on the outside at all, I was excited to see that.
While we're on the Jags here, Shawn, I know Travis Etienne is an interesting name to you. He's a guy I feel like I don't hear talked about a ton. It doesn't seem like people have very strong opinions on him. I'm guessing he is going to be a prominent figure on a upcoming Zero RB target list.
Yeah, it kind of depends on where we cut it and if we can let people be considered Zero RB with just the wide receiver times 4 or wide receiver times 3 with a tight end. But yeah, I mean, if you get him in the 5th round, I think we're looking at a situation. And one of the problems, and I think that in some ways, fantasy drafters have almost overcorrected. We can easily see this Alvin Kamara situation. And you look at the fact that when Kamara was a rookie, he was a running back 1, despite the fact that Mark Ingram scored a ton of points, right? A ton of points, also a running back 1. Okay, so the question is, can the Jaguars be even remotely like that? But even if you move down the numbers, so you take the rush EP down, you take the receiving EP down, you take the efficiency down, both of those guys can still hit on okay value at their ADP, which is better than trying to hit at okay value with a 2nd or 3rd round running back. If one of the two of them gets hurt, the other one can blow things away. But with ETN, because you have the receptions and then you have this likely phenomenal skill level and a chance to really outperform in touchdowns in a way that people I think are not looking at as being a realistic scenario. I mean, you've got a chance for him to destroy ADP even if Robinson is there. So if you're a believer in the Jaguars, you should have some ETN.
Did you just make a pro James Robinson argument in there?
I mean, that guy's so good, right? I mean, he's way better than Mark Ingram. So,
have you drafted James Robinson at all this offseason?
No, and I'm wondering if there are people who will take my dynasty shares, but he is good.
Yeah. And does the concern with James Robinson, would it be if you knew it was just a 2-man backfield, would you maybe be in on him more? Is it Carlos Hyde that muddies that up even more?
I honestly forget that Carlos Hyde is even on the team. I mean, he's so irrelevant, right?
I know.
Now when he's getting snaps, he's not. Yeah.
Urban Meyer coached him at Ohio State.
It's going to feel quite relevant.
You can go in and split out the fantasy points over expectation in almost any way you want. The worst running back in the NFL is always going to be Carlos Hyde.
Shawn, we
split it out almost. I mean, you got coffined, Carlos Hyde. I'm sorry.
Carlos Hyde has coffined himself for about the past 3 years.
That was good.
We mentioned the Dolphins backfield earlier. I feel like there's a couple other backfields that are particularly ambiguous. The Falcons, I think, are the other screaming one. Like, I feel like Mike Davis is going to have his Myles Gaskin moment soon. How are you playing that situation there? Because similar to Miami, it's a little tough to find ways to make really smart bets against the, presumed starter.
It is. I mean, how do you play that at all if you don't want it to be Davis? I still have a little bit of interest in Hawkins. Now, you'd prefer him to be much closer to Lindsey and Robinson, where those guys already were making a ton of noise at this point. And people knew that, okay, well, teams missed on them. They should have been drafted. We're not getting that sense at all. So, I mean, that's more of a red flag. I guess I was wondering, as you were sort of setting that question up, if Sony Michel was available when you guys drafted Malcolm Brown, because he still feels like a very legitimate chance to be the Dolphins starter. Probably not the Dolphins starter since it's the same division, but maybe the Atlanta Falcons starter.
Yeah. So
I don't know. He might still be available. We're actually on the clock as we speak, so I can look that up.
So is that just pure conjecture, Shawn, or have you heard more kind of trade rumors involving Sony?
No, it's just pure conjecture. Every time that I look at it, the enthusiasm they have for those other three guys is so high. And at the same time, Michel also supposedly looks good. And so that's either, the Patriots wanting you to believe they have three starters and one of the best pass catchers in the NFL, or they're really trying to create a situation where they could move him. And, they don't have much leverage to do that. But there are some teams out there that desperately need another running back. It's probably just, kind of the Chiefs fan in me. But, I mean, maybe the Patriots will also be reluctant to do any help for the Chiefs. I'm sure they see themselves and the Chiefs as the teams that are going to meet in the AFC Championship game. But there are teams that have terrible backups as well as teams that don't have a starter. And so there are lots of places that he could end up and be pretty valuable. If we're going to take Penny as someone who could still emerge, we've seen a little bit more from Michel. And I think his situation right now is just that he really is squeezed. Those other guys are good, right? And so they don't have anything to do with him. We know that the Patriots are so good at trading down within drafts. If they were able to get a team to give them something for him, it seems like they might do it. We also know they like depth, though, and running backs get hurt. So.
There is nothing that I want to happen more than Mike Davis to become a backup before the season even starts. For all these boomers that have been drafted in based on projected touches, to have Sony Michel come in and start week 1. There's nothing I want more.
That would be pretty nice. Sony Michel is available in our main event draft here, and that certainly fits the archetype of a take a peek guy. So we might have to discuss that after the show, because
I think
we're gonna get new information. So that he's kind of nice that way.
What about the Jets, Shawn? Our guy Frank mentioning them here. Michael Carter being fairly aggressively drafted, 7th, 8th round. Then he was losing some third down work, some first team work to Ty Johnson in this first preseason game. Although Tevin Coleman was out, he's in the mix as well. How are you handling the Jets?
Well, I would like to believe in Tevin Coleman because he's so inexpensive and he's so fast, where he was fast 5 years ago. I love those highlight runs. I love the run to daylight guys. Carter has some mild red flags in his profile, and that we'd like for him to be younger, someone who declared early, all those kinds of things. But he's also in this offensive system where the running backs could perform extremely well if the rest of the offense works. And then I was just reading some stuff about him today. I mean, he's evidently just a fantastic guy. And that's not particularly relevant for fantasy, but if you have a chance to have someone like that on your roster as opposed to a Deshaun Watson, then, I mean, that makes it better to watch every weekend. And so, I think that there's some real possibility there. I think that he's more athletic than he's being given credit for. I like to take the guys who are a little bit smaller. And if they were, say, 10 pounds heavier, they'd be going 4 rounds earlier. It's like, are you willing to pay 4 rounds for 10 pounds? Sometimes it makes sense because you know that.
Put it on a shirt. Are you willing to pay 4 rounds for 10 pounds?
How did Derrick Henry end up in the first round, guys? That's your answer.
Yeah.
I love the nod to karma, because Shawn really does draft that way. I've co-managed them for years, and you're always making these like small little tiebreakers on like, well, this guy's not really a shithead, so maybe we should take him. And this guy is a shithead. I don't want to take him. That's not your words. Those are mine. I want to ask while we're on the Jets, are you keeping a candle on for Denzel Mims? I haven't talked to you about him at all.
Well, the interesting thing, and I would love to hear what you guys are doing with him, but it sounds like he actually was super sinned, that is one of the problems he's had. Lost a bunch of weight. I mean, if you're trying to compete with NFL players, even if NFL players who beyond their starters, the other guys are probably not people you should have to be competing with. But, if you haven't been able to work out for weeks, if you've lost 10 pounds of muscle, if you were someone who needed that time to practice, needed to get better, needed to make this jump, and we're kind of borderline to start with, then it just takes you completely out of the equation, right? You can't be that limited and still be competitive with NFL guys. So it sounds like maybe the Jets are willing to give him a little bit more of a chance, or maybe they just, again, are kind of an excuse to where, like, somebody come offer us a 4th round pick for him. We're done. But, there were more. He had the good final season. He had another season that was in there that was pretty solid, extremely athletic, but the scouts didn't like him. And if you've got a 4-year guy that the scouts also don't like, despite the athleticism, then, you really do want to see him do something. And the teams that have been able to coach him here for the last couple of years, the different coaching staffs have not seemed to be on board, which, that's a concern.
Are there any other of these ambiguous backfields that you're paying particularly close attention to, or any players, maybe an Eno Benjamin type whose snaps you're looking for?
I did want to ask about the Patriots because we moved on from their post Michel, but I got to ask you about Ramondre. Ramondre, I was drafting a ton of. Now, you're saying the other guys are good. Damian Harris is good. James White is kind of locked into his role. Are you interested in Ramondre, or is he just kind of going to end up being a roster clogger? Because that's the kind of the journey that I've been going on with him. Is he's starting to feel like he's probably just a roster clogger, but certainly was very excited about him early on. Yeah,
so the Patriots have always had this element where even when their guys score a lot of points, it's very difficult for redraft. And if you then have the element where their offense may be bad, and if you have a poor offense and then you don't know who's going to start, it just really feels like the scenarios are such long shots that they can play out in the way that you want. And for him, Michel would need to be traded, Harris would need to be hurt, and then you'd need him to be so good as a receiver that they were okay leaving White on the bench a lot. Then you would probably need Mac Jones to win the starting job somewhat early in the season and then be good. So I like him. I think that in Dynasty, if you're in a deep Dynasty league, you need to do what it takes to get in. It's hard to see how he could pay off very well in redraft this season. But yeah, the talent is there, and that's what we want to make bets on. But much more than almost any other team, you have to have so much go right.
Yeah.
So are there any other backfields that you're paying attention to here as you move guys up and down your 0 RB list?
Well, obviously the Dillon and Pollards are really interesting because the scenarios there, you don't need to have much happen. You have the Arizona Cardinals, which it just seems like they're going to score a ton of points. The other rank that I've had sort of all offseason that probably is absurd, but it's nice to see the first preseason game, is that, I've had Rondale Moore as the number 6 rookie. And that could be hard to hit in such a good class again. But if you add like Steve Smith to this offense that has Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins, right? Even if there's some incompetency in play calling and scheme and all of that, how do you not score points? And then you look at a situation where you have Chase Edmonds, who has some elements to his portfolio where normally we'd be chasing him, right? We'd say that's the 0 running back play. You've got a pass catcher on a high scoring offense that's not being drafted in the first 6 rounds. How is that possible? And yet James Conner, someone who I feel like I'm breaking a lot of the things that I normally do, because it's like, don't chase running backs who have risen and then are done, right? I mean, guys who no longer can play at the NFL level, it's kind of the sad truth about NFL running backs, but you just don't last forever. And once you're not there, I mean, you don't want Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson, right? So, why do you want James Conner? But you've got a guy who has this 3-down profile who, is better than Kenyon Drake. If they wouldn't play Edmonds last season, when Drake is running into the line and falling down and ruining all of these drives, why would they play him if Conner is okay? I mean, even say, 85% of what he was a couple years ago. I read about the Cardinals every day. There's not a lot of reporting that gets you a ton of insight, but it sounds to me like that's a 50-50 backfield. And if that's the case, then, you have to have Conner on every team.
Wasn't there a little bit of talk that Edmonds might be the lead guy? So I'll give you one argument for why Conner and Drake might be different. They traded for Drake, and then they transition tagged him, and they maybe needed to justify that to a certain extent. And they gave Conner, $2 million, much talked about $2 million. People have said that's being overblown, whatever. But it was a very modest deal compared to what the investment they made in Drake. Do you think that plays in?
It might, but I think one of the other things with the free agent money is just that if a guy signed in the first week versus signed a little bit later, signed in the first couple of days in the tampering period versus a little bit later, it's very apples and oranges. It doesn't necessarily mean that the team was less excited about the guy. It just means they had more patience and they were willing to not massively overpay. There was the early report that Edmonds was definitely the guy and was going to have a monster season. Then there were reports recently that it's 50-50. Those are the two that got a lot of publicity. When you kind of go in and read the beat guys kind of every day on what happens in practice, and you listen to the two backs seem to think it's going to be 50-50. And, they don't get to decide. The coach gets to decide. But it seems like they think that they're going to be used in ways that fit their skill sets and are complementary, and there's going to be a lot of volume for both players. I think those guys are going to play a ton. I don't think the third, fourth guys are going to work in hardly at all until somebody gets hurt.
How do you find the time to know what every beat writer and every NFL player is saying? Like, you always know, quotes, and I'm like, how did I miss this? I spend all day on fantasy football, literally every day. I don't even see my kids.
I don't know much of anything, which is why I have to constantly check in with you guys, because without Twitter, all kinds of things happen. And I hope when I draft, this guy just, wasn't hurt a couple minutes ago. But if you're going to draft Conner on every team, you got to keep checking in, right? Because if that goes the other direction, you've got a lot of bad shares.
I just
specifically with Arizona. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I imagine that Shawn has just 250 Google alerts up for just every single player in the NFL.
Well, specifically with Arizona, I feel like they're not covered all that well. What are you reading with Arizona? Do you have go-to beats?
No, just whatever the papers around here come up, and when I figured out a way to get past the paywalls and whatnot. So
Shawn's VPNing into some.
You mentioned Rondale Moore, your high dynasty ranking on him. He obviously has a very exciting preseason debut. He's going still fairly late in these FFPC drafts. He's creeping up a little bit, and I assume after this past weekend he will even more. But in a perfectly efficient draft, where do you think Rondale Moore should be going in the FFPC?
I can't tell you, right? Because I would just draft him. You're out of the first round. Let's go ahead and make sure we get the next Steve Smith. No, I was doing
the second round.
I was thinking
the third was the high water for where you might go with that.
Shawn, it's the 6th round, and he's not coming back. You taking him?
There are guys who are further along in their development who we know are going to score in that range. But when I got a chance to talk with Leone about his zero RB draft, and we're going through the rounds, and he's like, well, I had my wide receivers, but I'm here in the 12th, and I felt like I had to take him in the 12th. And you're like, are the other 11 people participating? I mean, how can you be in the 12th round?
Shawn, I've got some best ball boards to show you, man. I've been doing these NFFC best balls, and you can just sit back. I think I got him in the 15th in one of them. It's wild.
Shawn, I think we could put our next dynasty pick on the board, because we were thinking about Rondale or making him wait, but I don't think after hearing you talk right now that we can try to wait and get him with our next pick. I don't want to lose. We already got DJ and Elijah Moore, so you feel like you kind of have to overpay for Rondale so you can just have all the Moores. I mean,
that's what I did in Scott Fishbowl. I did the Moore trifecta. Yep. It feels great.
It's nice. Shawn, this is like a gross team that no one ever talks about. But I do feel like it's maybe a little bit of a leak that we've just written off an entire NFL franchise. But is there anything that we can mine value-wise out of Houston? Is there anything at all? Nico Collins, any of these running backs, like Jordan Akins? Like, is there any fantasy value to be had in an entire NFL offense here?
Well, we talk about, how much do you want to pay for 10 pounds? If Brandon Cooks was not tiny, right? I mean, he could have like a 35% target share. And he actually is someone who fits okay with Taylor. And so it's just one of those things. I can't make the boring pick when I'm actually on the clock.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a good enough player that it doesn't necessarily have to be boring. And if they want to take some vertical shots, there could be some things. I mean, you're not going to be limited from a volume perspective other than, every team that he's played for has tried to ship him out or not re-sign him to the market value. So, clearly there are some things beyond just the numbers that he's putting up. The other one, and, we talk about like price matters because, you want to have the upside at the same time. A very valuable role, like you were mentioning, at a certain point in your draft is something you want to go ahead and buy. If David Johnson is more or less out of the equation, then Phillip Lindsay does become, it doesn't even seem like his price is going to change because they want to have him, co-starting with Ingram there. Lindsay is such a fantastic talent from a potential big play perspective that if that offense came out and actually was okay, then, at the price you have to pay, I like to have some shares of him.
That was a big if. Like, I was wondering where you're going with that, but you said if that offense comes out and is actually okay.
But, with Tyrod, right, you're going to have potential for an efficient rushing game off of what, potential running play. And I think the thing that could be tough is, being the third down guy. So I actually am more interested in Lindsay. Like, for once, the fact that they refuse to throw passes to him might not be such a big deal if he does end up playing ahead of Ingram. If he's splitting time with Ingram, it's over. But he shouldn't be. And Ingram might not make the team. Like, he's not a lock to make the team, I don't think.
I think that's a good point. And obviously, whenever Shawn is talking about a later on running back, I don't want to be too off on him. The concern for me is the lack of receiving that you just noted, potential lack of receiving. We don't necessarily know. I also have a really hard time seeing how he gets goal line touches of any sort anywhere near the red zone when basically all that Mark Ingram could add at this point is that, right? That's been him his whole career, is bigger back, green zone touches. And then David Johnson is one of the, premier green zone touches of his generation, of the things that he's done well in his career. Big back, agile. And then Phillip Lindsay's undersized. He's like 180, right? Like, how is Phillip Lindsay going to get a single carry inside the 10-yard line? That's my concern.
Shawn saying he's going to rush them all in from the 50-yard line.
I was not thinking about that.
What he's saying.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
To run the daylight there. There's a chance that the Texans are actually less incompetent than the Broncos from a deployment of running backs perspective. If the Broncos had used Lindsay the way he deserved after what he came out and did the first couple of years, he'd be someone who was a foundation piece of their team and a back who's going in the first 7-8 rounds of fantasy drafts. And so, the Texans need to do some things right. If they don't want to be 0-16, there's a chance that using Lindsay might be one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, that there's very little opportunity cost to where he's going in these drafts right now to find out. The other thing too, it does feel like there are situations where David Johnson could just be fully phased out. There's already been quotes about him grappling with this new role where he's not the lead back. He seems like a guy who could just check out. And then what? Is Mark Ingram getting carries in that or targets in that case? Phillip Lindsay could become, the pass down back in certain scenarios where David Johnson.
Don't forget about Rex Burkhead.
Oh, God. Is Rex still there?
Rex is still there.
Since signing in like 3 months, he's still
Rex
there.
is going to lead that backfield in fantasy.
Yeah.
Put that on the board. It's still not going to matter, but that's a bold prediction I want to make.
I love it.
And what about Pat mentioned Nico Collins? You went straight to Brandon Cooks. It sounds like not happening year one for Nico.
At a certain point, even a terrible offense is going to have some value for some of the individuals there. And he's another guy where if you're going to bet on someone with that sort of athletic profile, and again, someone who actually might work with Taylor. And so it's hard to see how in any of our builds in anything less than a start, 16 or 17 type of format that he would be working into the lineup. There are definitely some situations where in best ball leagues, if you kind of get caught out and need a last round pick to make your roster construction work there, that I think that he fits.
That kind of one thing that we've been discussing a lot through our main events is because we are so wide receiver heavy through 10 rounds, we're often done, by round 11 or 12 when we get our 8th wide receiver. We aren't taking a lot of shots on these late round wide receivers. And we've seen in previous years, Robbie Anderson, Tyler Boyd, we can find some really big hits here. Do you think that is a mistake, allowing our structures to never give us a pick there? And if so, who are some of the guys you think are worth bending that structure to target later?
Well, I know that you guys were talking about Brown. I think that the Washington offense is going to be extremely exciting. It may run through other players, but he's someone to have a little bit of exposure too late. I don't think that it's a mistake from the perspective of why not just get the exposure to the early guys if we have even a little bit more depth there. You have so many people to take a shot at. The other thing that is interesting about zero running back this year, and I think that does get missed a little bit, is that zero running back has always been kind of the safe way to play and not the risky way to play. At the same time, it's getting safer and safer and safer because it's basically impossible to get caught out at running back at this point because the options from round 9 to round 17 are so good. So if you didn't want to take someone in round 9, you wouldn't have to. If you didn't want to take someone in round 10, you wouldn't have to. In the fishbowl, I think I took 7 or 8 consecutive running backs down the stretch. In the Apex League, took 7 or 8 consecutive running backs down the stretch. It wasn't this thing of feeling like I was even that weak at running back. It was that the value in the draft was so clearly there. And you have to take what the draft gives you in any individual year. And this year it's giving you these great running back opportunities very, very late.
It's so clear. Pete's been saying that all summer too. He feels like every double-digit round, the best pick is a running back, or like the later double-digit rounds especially, because wide receivers are getting pushed up. I mean, it's so easy to do zero at running back now.
And I think I've forever had PTSD from when Pat and I have done a couple of our live main event drafts in Vegas, and every single trendy zero RB guy is pushed up. I always remember the Justice Hill, Darwin Thompson, and they're going in the late 7th, early 8th. And it's like, how are we supposed to do zero RB when all the best guys are there? Now we just did our main event where we got Tony Pollard and AJ Dillon in the 9th and the 10th with no sweat whatsoever. Has there been some kind of bigger macro change there? I'm trying to figure out why that is, or do we expect once more preseason comes, these guys all get pushed up again?
We are seeing some shifts, and you do see in redraft that it's a little bit more challenging. One of the things that you get a little bit used to is playing in so many best ball leagues where multiple quarterbacks and multiple tight ends are an important part of your structure. And then that pushes the running backs down. Whereas in redraft, if you get your Josh Allen, if you get your Kyler Murray, you can't afford to be wasting picks at the QB position. You draft your Darren Waller or your George Kittle. I mean, you're maybe taking another tight end, but you're taking them late. I mean, you're looking for more of the real swing for the fences guys. Now, that's maybe not what you should do at tight end, but it's what people are doing. And so then the 10 through 14 gets to be a little more the sweet spot, and 15 through 20 or however deep your draft goes, that can get a little bit weaker. But yeah, I mean, you still have a lot of opportunities, and especially if you do have exposure to somebody in the first couple rounds, or maybe you've decided that despite what we know about the dead zone, that some of the really young guys and or the young guys who have such clear receiving elements to their profile, and the talent is also there to where they could fall into the early down touches if the guy they're sharing with either struggles or gets hurt. So you take a guy in the third, you take the guy in the fourth, fifth. If you have one guy early, then, if you can put one player with a Pollard, with a Dillon, then, you're just home free. But the nice thing about it is that Dillon and Pollard could very easily not work out. And so you do want to have some more guys. And this year, there are just so many. I think that the backup running backs have continued to get more exciting in a way that matters, because these offenses are learning how to use the backs. You know that you're going to get receiving touches from most of the people you're targeting. And then, Darrington Evans, for example, in almost all of the scenarios, he's going to not help you, but there are scenarios in which he's the most important guy in the entire league. Now, maybe those are even smaller, since it seems like it only takes him 2 or 3 plays to get hurt, even when he's the starter in a game. But there are a lot of guys like that, to where if you're targeting the right profiles, you're going to feel very good at it, because your chances to go through, like Blair and I did last year with Hines and McKissick, and really not hit, it's just so limited. And then even then, you still have your Jeff Wilsons that you can put in for a game or two, and you don't always know when they're going to come, but sometimes it's very clear. And so you've got a guy you just picked up on free agency the week before that you're looking at because of the role in the right offense. You're like, this is like a 25 point per game situation. And if
a second round running back, you're just starting randomly. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just things have evolved to where you can feel very good about it.
I want to ask you. Sorry, but before we change the subject, I want to throw one more thought on that. Back onto Pete's original question of why we're here. People mistake that. Shawn talks about this all the time. We've talked about it on the show. People mistake the depth of receiver or what that means, right? There are various tiers, and then there's a very big drop-off around the 10th, 11th, 12th round. I would argue, as the league has shifted, you were talking about some of the macro changes, Pete, in your question. As the league shifted, as we've got more pass-heavy, as we've gone more shotgun, multiple receiver sets, all that stuff, the wide receivers above that bar has grown, basically. Like, I'm looking at a main event draft right now. Will Fuller was wide receiver 49. Marquise Brown, after the Bateman injury, was wide receiver 51. Like, that's the difference for me where you're talking about the Justice Hill a few years ago. Marquise Brown doesn't go wide receiver 51 a few years ago. With the profile he has right now, Will Fuller doesn't go wide receiver 49 a few years ago. We're getting more and more receivers that are very interesting, that are above that bar. And then also people are still kind of making this confusing point that means wide receivers deep. It doesn't necessarily mean that. There's still tiers within those tiers, as Shawn talks about, like the Tee Higgins and those guys that have these really great profiles. You can't just wait for the Will Fullers and the Marquise Browns, but that's when it really falls off, and it's almost like you're just taking rookie shots or really high upside bets after that, or not drafting receivers. But I think that group in the first 10 rounds is so much deeper at receiver. I think that's part of why people have bought in more this year too. I think people have bought in the dead zone for other reasons, and best ball and a lot of stuff. I also just think there's enough names there that it's like it's easier to do. It's easier to buy into a lot of these guys.
Well, in the FFPC for sure, you're seeing less. You're seeing fewer extreme running back builds with the idea that I need to have 7 or 8 running backs so that I have my 2 starters and then I have my 2 flex positions filled. And one of the things that'll be interesting to see kind of as we go, we're all very much on the, zero RB-ish element of things. We think we know how it's going to go. It'll be interesting to see if the more balanced teams, how they perform, over several years, because there are a lot of people who have stopped going extreme running back heavy, but are now balanced. And that construction pushes down some of the running backs we want to where they're very easy for us to get. We think that construction is still suboptimal enough that it's not going to lead to too many wins. And that actually helps us. People drafting slightly more efficiently helps those of us who are going extremely wide receiver heavy.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it really helps. I do want to ask you kind of on the construction stuff. Like we've been doing a ton of best ball, and it's so much emphasis on how many guys you're taking at each position. And I've been thinking through that a bit more this year than I have in the past. With wide receiver, I think almost all of our teams, main event teams, have 8 wide receivers. Part of me feels like I want more, partly to Pete's point of, you can still take a couple of these late shots. But generally what we've been doing is, for the most part, we've been getting the vast majority of our wide receivers early and then kind of hammering running back through the back end, ending up with a total of 8 wide receivers. Is that generally kind of where you're at in terms of total wide receivers? Or are you going a little heavier than that? Are you comfortable starting having even less than that if you've started super wide receiver heavy?
No, that's about where I am with it. And the difference between redraft and best ball is that you can be a little bit more all over the place with redraft, because you can quickly fix kind of where you are with your team in waivers once the season starts. I think that you want to take the best players in your redraft draft and then kind of let it go. Whereas, obviously you can't do that in best ball. So you have to be very precise in terms of how you're balancing some of those early picks. But yeah, so you want to get all of that wide receiver firepower, knowing you can fix the other positions later. And we always talk about, can you get to the point where you have 6 of the top 15 wide receivers or 6 of the top 20? It's very difficult to lose once you do that, especially if you're also doing it with an elite tight end, right? You should be going into all of these drafts trying to figure out how you can get a tight end that separates and 6 of the top 15 wide receivers. You're unlikely to do it just by drafting 6 guys. So, we need to have some exposure to some of the people. We need to have an exposure to people like Mecole Hardman, that once the season starts, everybody's going to come back to you and be like, well, that was a terrible pick. You were wrong on that guy. And you're like, yeah, so I was wrong on somebody. We know we're going to be wrong on some people, but you need to have exposure to them in order to have your overall build have enough upside. We would just draft the perfect team if we knew exactly how the season was going to play out. But, some of those guys in round 9, round 10, you have your Ragers and that kind of thing. Hopefully he doesn't get too expensive on the fact that he's now made a highlight catch or 2 in camp, because you need. He's
to still pretty cheap. I'm trying to get him on our roster, man. 2 times these guys talk me out of him. I tried. Devontae Parker, too much to pass up. Apparently, I don't know what to tell you.
Shawn, one other structural shift I've noticed this year is last year we were taking the detour in like rounds 5 through 7 for that elite QB a ton, because it seemed there was like a very definitive tier break. It was like once Will Fuller was off the board, there was a pretty big gap at wide receiver there. This year, it seems like we're very rarely doing that. I think we have one team where Lamar Jackson fell pretty far and we scooped him up. And instead, we've been playing kind of this rookie tier with the Lawrence, the Fields, and those guys. So where are you at this year from kind of a quarterback standpoint? I don't believe you're necessarily super, super high on the rookies just from the rankings I'm seeing. So I'm curious how you're playing that.
Yeah, one of the things that seems odd is that I think with quarterbacks, you have to always sort of look, that's going to be a position you don't spend a lot of slots on. And so sometimes it also feels like we shouldn't use a lot of value when maybe they're slightly different things. I always like to target the quarterbacks anytime I'm in a flat spot in the draft. And sometimes you get in trouble because you're like, well, I think this guy is more, maybe I have him ranked in round 6, but his ADP is around 8. So maybe I'll just wait. And then the people go a little bit early and you're like, well, obviously I should not have taken the quarterback. I needed to get more wide receiver value there. But one of the things that I've been seeing with the rookies that is sort of a weird problem is that they come in right where some of my favorite running backs are. And so if I have to pass on one of those guys who will make the zero RB construction work, I'd almost rather just take, a Josh Allen or a Jackson, Murray, those guys. And again, usually when they fall a little bit, you'll be in drafts where they all go in the 5th round or the 4th round, even, in the late 6th, mid 7th, it's more appealing. And especially in formats where people don't have to have 2, 3, then, you're likely to have it fall a little bit further for you. But that's been the weird thing, I think, with the rookie quarterbacks. I am getting excited though, because maybe even more for Fields than for Lance, because it just seems like he's going to be there pretty early and it is going to be awfully good.
That's how I've been feeling after this week, is that Fields is going to play first. Andy Dalton, I think, is a disaster right now.
I remember someone saying that And around draft season to you, Pat, you and Leone, it was a little 2-on-1. I remember.
Unfortunately, I don't remember this. So
I don't see where the guy is. But.
I hope we recorded it. Did we? Did we record it? Is this on a podcast?
We've never had a fantasy football thought that wasn't recorded, Pat. So I'm pretty sure it was.
Well, with the new information, I've updated my opinion, and I now agree with Ben that Fields was going to play first.
You just got me on the Rager point. I was sitting here like, how did we take Parker over Rager?
I don't know. I tried to get us not to.
You're right. You were right.
So which of those late round quarterbacks, Shawn, are your favorites? And I'll even toss in like Tua into that discussion with those guys as well.
Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be a top 10 quarterback. So with his price, I mean, you almost have to set up every team to where you have exposure to somebody you think has a chance to win you the $500,000. And then Fitzpatrick, who's actually going to work with Logan Thomas in week 17 to win you the $500,000. The only problem with if you had the very last guy is that, you find yourself, okay, I've set up my entire team around my 16th round pick. And then he goes 5 spots ahead and you're like, well, we got to start over. So, you either end up drafting Ryan Fitzpatrick a lot earlier than ADP, or you miss on him. And now, so you got to have an earlier guy, but he's somebody I do want to have a lot of exposure to late.
Shawn and I talked about him a little today. And I mean, I'm glad you just gave that take, but we were waxing poetic. But I mean, he gave that take first before we talked about him. But like, he just is so clearly this guy that has gotten better over the years. I mean, I agree with it. I actually went back and looked at my rankings that I released on my newsletter last weekend, and I have him ahead of in a tier ahead of Daniel Jones and some of these guys that go ahead of him. In a group with Matt Ryan and Baker Mayfield and Zach Wilson, who I think are some upside later round quarterbacks. I have Fitzpatrick in that group. Anyway, he's so clearly a guy that has gotten better and better and better throughout his career. And I don't think people really realize that, because even into his 30s, he was not very good. But he's so clearly somebody who, whether it's reps because he didn't get him early in his career or whatever, somebody who picked up and understands especially how to play the quarterback position aggressively. People love to talk about his interceptions. I freaking love the way that he takes chances when his team's down. Like Kevin Cole used to talk a lot about how Aaron Rodgers wouldn't do that as much as he should. Wouldn't throw enough interceptions, and people would rip on him and say, this is why analytics is so stupid. They're saying that Aaron Rodgers should throw more interceptions. But the reality is, when you're down 10 points in the fourth quarter, you need to take chances. You need to throw one-on-one balls, maybe even in double coverage. Ryan Fitzpatrick has always been willing to do this. And when he does it, sometimes he'll throw a pick, they'll fall behind, he'll take a chance again, because he understands the only way we're winning this game, it doesn't matter if I throw 3 picks in a row, but then it's very memorable. Oh, Ryan Fitzpatrick melted down, he threw 3 interceptions. He always does this in a situation where it actually makes sense as a competitor to be trying to throw more aggressive plays out there, and he starts stringing them together, and no one really seems to realize that. On the flip side, what happens when his gambles pay off is we start talking about the Fitzmagic. He understands how to play the percentages, the probabilities, and he's had some of these amazing comebacks, and we're like, oh my God, Ryan Fitzpatrick, how does he pull this stuff out of his ass? He understands how to be aggressive when you need to be aggressive. He's actually gotten really smart as a quarterback. I mean, whatever.
He's really smart.
Guy went to Harvard, but he's I think it's more through reps and all the stuff, but he's one of these guys. Shawn made the Kurt Warner comp on our comparison earlier. Some quarterbacks get so much better really late in their career because they just start to really understand the feel and all of those things that maybe were too fast for them when they were younger. Fitzpatrick is so clearly one of those guys that it's kind of a shame that his physical tools are going to run out eventually because he's super old, right? But he's playing the best football of his life. He was playing the best football of his life last year when they benched him in Miami. He's really good. He's actually very, very good at quarterback. I think everyone thinks it's sort of a joke, oh, he's Fitzmagic, whatever. He throws all these interceptions. This dude's actually a really good NFL quarterback right now.
The Rich Gannon career arc.
Rich Gannon is another great comp of this type of quarterback. That Rich Gannon sucked in the 90s. He was bad. he was a backup his whole career, and then he won a Super Bowl, right? MVP, I think.
He won the MVP.
Yeah,
he didn't win the Super Bowl. He
did win the Super Bowl.
He threw like 5 interceptions in it.
He lost the Super Bowl. He lost the Super Bowl. Yeah,
he decidedly lost the Super Bowl, but he did win the MVP. Well, Shawn, so Logan Thomas, obviously a target in this Fitzmagic season. Where are we taking McLaurin then?
That's what I was just going to ask.
Yeah, so I don't really have any of him, but only because you're in that range where it's almost impossible to get those guys, right? I mean, you have to have, unless you're playing hundreds and hundreds of leagues, you've got to have the exact right draft slot because
Pete's got him.
You're not going to be able to get him. You're not going to draft him ahead of CeeDee Lamb. And so it's right in that range. And most of my teams have been in the 9, 10, 11, 12. And so he's going to go 1 or 2 picks before you every time. But that's where he belongs. I think that he's one of those guys who's valued exactly appropriately. You can certainly win with him. And if I'm right about Fitzpatrick, then you probably will. But I don't know that there's a ton of extra upside there in that his entire arc is probably not of a guy who's going to jump into that Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown sort of range. But perhaps the difference between an Alex Smith and a Ryan Fitzpatrick will do that because the peripherals have been good. Pat, you wrote an extraordinary article for us several years ago talking about kind of the strengths and weaknesses of his profile, and he's backed up being that level of talent since then.
And what in that same scenario, thought experiment where he's a top 10, what do you think that means for Gibson?
One of the things that I do think is just a little bit of a problem is that I don't know that offense is going to need to throw the ball to the running back very much. You look at the different profiles of backs and or quarterbacks, and you have these guys, like a Phillip Rivers who are going to throw it every time. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick knows where he's going to throw the ball when the ball is snapped and doesn't even care if the receiver is open. Now he throws it very accurately, right? But he's going to throw these guys open. He's going to let them make plays on the ball. Do they structure the offense to where there are a ton of passes to the running back? I mean, he's going to run an efficient offense. I mean, Gibson's going to catch balls, but I don't know that we have the overall upside there. But Gibson, I think, is a little bit like an Aaron Jones, where you have that potential for a 20 touchdown season, and you do want to factor that in. I mean, completely ignoring touchdowns is not going to get you where you want to be as a fantasy player, right? The problem is just that, do you want Gibson when Aaron Jones is often available at the same time? And I mean, we know that he's a star. We know the Packers are going to score a ton of points. Now, Dillon is probably more of a problem for him than McKissick is for Gibson, but we're not sure about that either. So,
gotcha. You mentioned someone in the chat earlier was actually asking for us to discuss Aaron Jones, and they pointed out that we haven't discussed him a lot this year, which I think is correct. I don't remember too many Aaron Jones discussions. A little bit dinged up stuff aside, where are you at on Aaron Jones, and where is he fitting into those kind of second tier running backs for you?
Well, he and Ekeler are kind of together there for me in that I think they're fantastic players. I don't think they get enough credit for their talent levels. There's no question that Ekeler and Aaron Jones are at a completely different level than like a Joe Mixon, right? And so to have them being drafted in similar places seems a little bit off to me because you just have to have talented players if you're going to spend that on them. At the same time, it's almost impossible to figure out how they can get to where they need to be to justify that first or second round pick. Now with Aaron Jones, maybe it's all that has to happen is AJ Dillon gets hurt. And sometimes we don't talk about that enough. I mean, one of our listeners on OT the other day was talking about, he took Chubb in a listener league in late round 3, and people are like, well, how are you getting in there? But obviously those are wide receiver heavy drafts. But at that point, some of the upside of Hunt getting hurt is not priced in. And so we do have some of these guys. I think that you want to take a risk on the elite talents to do that from time to time. But again, I mean, you're talking about price being a situation where, does Stephon Diggs need anything weird to happen to score a bunch of points and pay off? Hill, Devontae Adams, they don't, right? And so when you're looking at some of those choices, now maybe once you get down into Jefferson, Ridley, AJ Brown, it's a little bit more even. But I prefer to have the wide receiver there as mostly the issue.
Yeah, that's definitely what happens too. And I feel like in previous years, zero RB at the turn was so easy because all the running backs went the first 8-9 picks, and then you were taking off in the first wide receiver available there. Now this year, it's a little bit more muddied. You can end up in these drafts where the top 3 wide receivers are off the board, and you are having to maybe reach on, by ADP on a Hopkins and AJ Brown, Metcalf. So it is a little trickier this year when guys like Ekeler and Aaron Jones are there. It seems like it's not quite as easy of a decision as in years past.
Well, and I think the biggest lesson from that entire discussion all offseason that for some reason I don't think is like said a lot or figured out, or I mean we've definitely talked about it, but like potentially starting at running back 2, but certainly by running back 3, there's a tier that lasts until like DeAndre Swift. And there's no difference. Yeah. We were talking about this the other day that DeAndre Swift and Antonio Gibson aren't that different, except for you have to pay a 1-2 turn price on Gibson, and you can get Swift at the end of the third sometimes. I mean, now he's typically going in the second 2-3 turn, but you have this huge tier at running back, and so it does sort of flip the build some because you don't have a huge tier at receiver. The top 3 receivers are really, really interesting. Ridley's interesting. DK and AJ, like Shawn was saying. Maybe they're closer to some of those running backs, but like they're still more interesting than the receivers you can get in the third round, especially after like CD comes off the board. McLaurin, Shawn was just talking about. Once you get into that range, if you can get Swift, I'm taking Swift over McLaurin personally. So there's like these different scenarios where like that used to be sort of the dead zone, but because this running back tier is so basically deep and flat to me, like you look at any analyst, like everyone has a different top 5. Everyone has a different RB3. I mean, everyone, like some people have Aaron Jones up there. Some people have Ekeler up there. People have taken them that high. Some people have Zeke up there, obviously. Henry. We're talking about Taylor and Barkley with Shawn, that they belong up there. But you can go right back to Gibson and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Swift, and all of these guys are the same bet to me. I mean, they're not that different of a bet.
And you have different options of how you want to play it too, based on what you think is important profile-wise and what you think is important risk-wise, because you have someone even a little bit less expensive in J.K. Dobbins, who is going to outscore half of the backs ahead of him, right? But is he going to score to the level where you still wanted him on your team?
Yeah,
and so,
right.
You have some interesting plays.
He's like such a clear. I got my brother plays a lot of fantasy. Was just asking me today about Dobbins, and I was like, he likes to take more running backs than I do. And I was like, he's gonna be a good pick for you. The way that you like to take running backs in the early rounds, like he's actually like a pretty solid, safe pick as far as running backs go. Dobbins, he's just probably not a top 5 or top 3, type finisher.
On Stealing Bananas, Shawn, you had said something about, like Nick Chubb in some ways not being as bad as some of the picks around him, even though he's probably he needs a Hunt injury and then a change in his role to ever kind of get to where we want him to go. But at the same time, he's an incredible rusher. He's probably the best rusher in the entire NFL. So you're still dealing with a bit of a higher floor, even though a high floor at running back is generally a trap. But in that case, there is almost a high floor because his talent is unlikely to go away this year. J.K. Dobbins, bit of a similar bet, I guess. I've tried to get a little exposure in best ball, just with the hyperfry builds, making the use of his score every week. But I definitely underweight just because it's hard to see how the ceiling comes with the receptions. He kind of needs to just have an insane amount of breakaway touchdowns, I think.
Yeah, I think the thing with Dobbins would be, are you comfortable enough in the rest of your build at that point? And perhaps, like, when do you need the points? And are we concerned entirely about, like, full season crush? Or are we okay with Derrick Henry if that snow game doesn't happen, right? Because if all you need is for the back to hit 3 weeks, then maybe you're okay with Dobbins. Because the chances, I mean, you need to get lucky regardless. I mean, the idea that Todd Gurley was guaranteed to have that monster season, or that, Kamara was going to have the
6 touchdowns and
a full season's worth of touchdowns in one game.
Some people predicted a 50-point Alvin Kamara game in emails to multiple people on this call. I just want that on the record.
But, you look at what the Ravens do scoring-wise. I mean, if you had to guess who's going to score the most touchdowns in the fantasy playoffs at running back, J.K. Dobbins should be one of your top 3 or 4 guys. And so if that's what you're going for and you think you're going to win the $500,000 that way, then I almost like him from the perspective of he's a little bit less expensive. And if you've drafted him there and you've drafted receivers otherwise, your team is going to be in position. And then you're in position that maybe you win the whole thing because you had the right guy at the right time. And so I think the combination of talent and individual week upside, you could almost play it like that, even though we know he doesn't have the profile to have a full season anywhere close to a Kamara or a Christian McCaffrey or somebody like that.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot more for best ball too, and just the way that those tournaments are structured, where these guys might not be the best full season picks, but they could have the 1 or 2 spike weeks 15 to 17 that you need to advance. And so that's why previous years I just, X out Henry, X out Chubb. This year I end up being around 5 to 7% on those guys, just knowing I could fit the pieces around them in a smart structure. And it sounds like you're saying you could do that in a managed league, maybe with the Dobbins too. There is that little tier break after Allen Robinson and McLaurin go. You get into kind of the older guys with, Mike Evans, Godwin, those guys. Maybe you grab him there, come back around, get him more Higgins. So I could see little pockets where it would make sense to make that detour if you wanted.
Definitely. Anybody that has the talent and has that individual week upside, if you're not having to pay first, second round prices, it becomes more interesting. And like you said, managing the tier breaks is a big element this season. I think that the people who draft in the top, 3 or 4 slots have such a huge advantage. If you're drafting in the back half, you've got to be creative and you want to make sure you're very intentional about how you draft to neutralize that advantage and to give yourself outs to overcome it.
So the advantage that you talk about with the early draft slots, obviously the 101, you get Christian McCaffrey. That's a huge advantage. But the way I feel about it is like the extent to which you have the advantage after that is really because of the 3rd round. It's that you get that early 3rd round pick. Yeah. You get the chance to take like CeeDee Lamb. You get the chance maybe to get an AJ Brown in the FFPC. He'll fall into the early 3rd. And in some ways, like then, because the 3rd round's really the advantage, then don't go with the crowd in the 1st round. And like you can take your wide receiver there in the early 1st because you're not burning the advantage. The advantage hasn't even come yet. The advantage is coming in the 3rd round. What do you go ahead. I just want to throw it to you guys after that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you probably wanted that, Shawn. But that I got asked today about moving back from like the 4th pick in a high stakes league in a league where you can make trades of his whole draft, and I was like, yeah, I mean, from the 4th pick, in the 1st round, I don't mind the later pick, but it's the 3rd round and the 5th round too, I think, that are more important to me. And so I don't want to move back, but I think you should take a receiver there because, even though you want to take running backs and everything, and then you can get Swift in the early 3rd is the thing. It's like, and you're making the same bet as the running back you could take it for. I mean, that's sort of the point that I was making, is the whole soliloquy I just had about the flatness of that tier. You can start with 2 really strong receivers and Swift out of the early pocket. And then also the 4-5 turn is great. You can get the ETN in the early 5th if you really are a running back drafter. Just take your running backs in the 3rd and the 5th. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree that the 3rd and the 5th have that tier break. You feel that a lot. Like once CeeDee Lamb goes in the 3rd, and now we're starting to see drafts where Aiyuk isn't even making it to the early 5th. They're getting pricey, and we've been prioritizing Aiyuk, Claypool. And we ended up settling for Jeudy in ours, but I think we were all starting to really come around on Jeudy at that selection there as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you almost need some other people to work with you, because if you pass on Barkley and Taylor, I mean, they're just going to get drafted right afterward. But one of the reasons why, even if those top 3 guys are gone, that you might go Ridley Brown or Ridley Jefferson or some combination of that, is just that you need to keep taking those wide receivers because how are you going to compete with the Christian McCaffrey owner, the Travis Kelce owner, if they're also having those receivers?
Yeah, you can't let them get back to him. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think about that, like, how do you beat Christian McCaffrey? If Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, how do you beat Christian McCaffrey?
But even worse, if you let him go Christian McCaffrey, Jefferson, because you didn't take Jefferson at the turn, and Jefferson made it all the way back. Like, oh.
Right.
That's probably one of the fundamentals of Zero RB that is stuck in my head the most, of when you are taking those running backs at the back end of the first, you're building a watered down, worse version of the 101 team with a 70% on the dollar, in the case of CMC, maybe 50% on the dollar running back. And then they're also getting the better wide receivers. It's, and like, I just want to so far behind.
I want to hammer a point that we've made before, but Shawn and Blair's team last year was a pure Zero RB team. There's people who say that, like, oh, Zero RB's never won one of these major tournaments or whatever. It was, I believe Shawn said, the second best scoring team that didn't have Kamara last year in the FFPC main event. Kamara was a top 5 pick in every main event draft. So more than half of all main event draft teams that were drafted were non-Kamara. You didn't have access to Kamara. So more than half the field. And what Shawn did was a Zero RB team and basically finished second of those potential teams, right? And the point I've always made about the fact that Zero RB's never won it is it's a very small sample. Very few people are actually trying it. Of course, when 95% of the field is not doing Zero RB, 99%, it hasn't necessarily had the perfect combination of all the right hits and all those things. But last year was like, there's your evidence. I want to like pound the table on this point. People really want evidence. Kamara was the league winner. You couldn't have drafted him at the back. To Pete's point that he just made, you're not going to keep up with the elite top 5 running back that has the monster legendary season. You can't draft that running back at 12. You don't have access to him. So you do what Shawn and Blair did. You go Zero RB, and you finish literally almost as best as possible. I think there was one team that finished better than him out of all those other teams that didn't have access to Kamara. And it's more like 75%. He was a top 3 pick. 75% of the field didn't have access to Kamara. And a Zero RB team, one of the very few Zero RB teams in that tournament, was better than 75% of the field.
Yeah, and I've fallen into this trap with Gibson, and I think I've seen people literally say, like, I have to draft Ekeler, I have to draft this running back because I need a guy who I can beat Christian McCaffrey with. And it's like, we're gonna flip over these cards. Like, we're gonna see who's who in the back of the draft, and like the odds are that there is not anyone who can beat Christian McCaffrey. Like that's the odds. You can't just say I need to beat Christian McCaffrey, therefore I need this guy to be a guy he's not. Right? He either is or isn't that guy. Now there's a probability that I think this year probably maybe better than most years. There's a chance that there are some of those guys in the second round, but we could be completely wrong about that, and they could just not be there. This could be a year where Christian McCaffrey, I would say probably the most likely scenario is Christian McCaffrey is the only running back who is able to score at the elite legendary levels, and everyone else is fool's gold. And if that's the case, then the only path remaining is to hammer the Christian McCaffrey owner with wide receivers, and he can't catch you there.
Can I just end the point in the obvious logical conclusion that I didn't take it to, which is if Kamara doesn't score 6 TDs, we're talking right now about how Stephon Diggs' Monday night performance propelled a Zero RB team of Shawn's into second overall. That's what we're talking about. That's what actually would have happened.
Shawn, have you thought about that?
Stephon Diggs' huge performance on Monday night didn't get the discussion it did because Kamara had already done what he did on Thursday night of that week, or Saturday, or whenever his massive game was. But if he doesn't have that game, and Kamara isn't the linchpin or like the key that you had to have last year, then your team would have finished second with the Diggs performance on Monday.
There may have even been a few other teams in there, and also we finished far enough back.
No, I am making a loud point right now.
Kamara could have probably scored quite a few fewer touchdowns in that week and still had his teams ahead of us. But you look at the situation there in terms of it's been a running back. There are easier paths for running backs, and that they're more likely to have the massive touchdown game, right? But when you look at the overall scoring profiles and you look at Devontae Adams, you look at Tyreek Hill, are you going to say that those guys couldn't go off for a stretch, during the fantasy playoffs, that Antonio Brown could not have carried a team to the 500,000? I think that the top 2 scoring guys behind Kamara last season, were Diggs and Ridley. And we don't even necessarily think of them as having the ceilings that an Adams and a Hill would have. I mean, it's only a matter of time until one of those receivers has the point total that carries the teams there. Now, there are seasons in which that receiver will come a little bit later. I mean, last season, obviously, all those teams at the top had both Kamara and Diggs. And most of them also had Josh Allen. I think one of the interesting things about the final was that it was like actually Josh Allen versus Stephon Diggs head-to-head for the top 2 spots. And I think it was the very final touchdown that put the Diggs owner, over the top, which is, great for all of us Diggs fans. But, so you have some of these combinations where it can be the running back with some of these receivers, but we're going to have a season where it's all the receivers together that get the job done.
Because the ADP allows you to do that. Like every year we get the chance to figure out, put all these receivers together on the same team in a way that you can't really do at running back. And even if you attempt to do it running back, is so much riskier, right? Because when you don't hit on the guys at the wide receiver position that become Diggs, you do often land on guys that are extremely helpful along the way.
There is one more out, fellas. One more out, and that is 101 teams, from my experience, they love fucking it up. They absolutely love to fuck it up. So there is always that extra out.
Yeah, that's quite true.
I believe, Pat, I think we have maybe one 101.
We have 0 101s, Pete.
Is it
we
0?
are 0 for 14. Okay. We are 0 for 14 on 101s in the main event. Yeah. I did just get back-to-back 101s in my NFFC best ball. And those are 35 rounds, so I needed the consolation of the 101.
Shawn, any other takes we've gotten some hot takes tonight. Hamler over Sutton, Rondale Moore in the late second. Any other
top 10?
Yeah, Fitzmagic. Any other hot takes you want to workshop here before you get back to work at Rotoviz?
Oh, that's a good question. I tried to get all of the fun stuff in there for you. Well, I mean, talk about some of the values on these wide receivers. We did take CeeDee Lamb at the 202. And so people who are thinking he's going to come to them in round 3 probably are going to be disappointed during the actual high stakes drafts there.
Do you want to talk a little bit about him? When you said that you couldn't take him over McLaurin, there was a bunch of comments in the chat about why can't you do that?
I may have articulated it poorly. Just that when you're in that range there, you're trying to hit on.
Sorry. You said you have to take Lamb. I said that backwards.
Yeah.
You said you can't take McLaurin over CeeDee Lamb, and people were wondering, why can't I take McLaurin over CeeDee Lamb?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously could. I think it's a more fun. Maybe it's just a more fun play to take Lamb. I think that he is the guy who, you kind of go back and forth on, well, what's the overall offensive volume going to be? I'm concerned that Gibson will be so good that they don't pass as much. I'm concerned that defense will be so good that they don't pass as much. So that's the flip side of the Fitzpatrick hot take, is that you could have an offense that is efficient and low volume, running back heavy. I think that you do have some other targets there in Washington that maybe don't get enough credit for siphoning volume, that you obviously do get that credit in Dallas, where you've got Gallup, you've got Amari Cooper. I think that Cooper is a pretty risky guy right now with some of the things that he is dealing with. I think that their tight ends maybe don't get the receiving volume that people are looking for. I think maybe the running backs don't get the receiving volume that people are looking for. You look at Washington, Logan Thomas, Curtis Samuel, Adam Humphries. You don't want, if you're a McLaurin drafter or a Samuel drafter, you don't want Adam Humphries to be someone who's being talked about as the go-to target there. You have Brown as the vertical receiver. There are ways that Washington can play this offense that doesn't have to be funneled through McLaurin. And one of the things that we've seen is that defenses have taken him away to an extent, and the quarterbacks have gone a different direction. Now, I think that Fitzpatrick is going to be more aggressive, but CeeDee Lamb, you're talking about a 1,500-yard, 15 touchdown upside. Now, the number of times you play the season and you actually get that, it's going to be super high. But when we're talking about the combination of just elite talent within an offense that could be the highest scoring in football, could be the highest volume in football, then I think that you have to take that guy there. I mean, we're looking at somebody who is about to embark on, or at least if you're an enthusiast, about to embark on this DeAndre Hopkins-esque run where you're a top 5 guy, for 7 or 8 years, you're a top 1 guy 2 or 3 times. We don't know which season he's going to be overall number 1. but you want to start drafting him so
We
that
don't
you
know
have
which
him.
season, but it's definitely going to happen.
This is a good segue here into some plugs, Shawn. Everyone wants to know when's the Zero RB series dropping here?
Well, thank you. Yeah, next week is going to be Zero RB for the first run, and then we'll try and do an update as we get even a little bit closer for those final main event drafts.
Awesome. And I saw lots of love for stealing bananas in the chat earlier, which is much deserved. If for some reason you guys are watching this show and haven't checked out Ben and Shawn, I don't know how that would happen, but let's just say there is. It is a great podcast series. You guys are churning out 3 of those a week on the Rotoviz podcast network. Anything else coming with your upcoming plans?
I want to make a quick plug real quick, which is that we next Wednesday, right, are going to draft a team, the 4 of us, that we didn't really talk a ton about tonight. I have been lucky enough to get to podcast with all 3 of you on a weekly basis. I think this is going to be my favorite team. This has been an awesome conversation. I am super excited for next week. Don't miss it.
Yeah, I need to. Let me double check on that. Is it next
9-1? It's not next Wednesday. It's the Wednesday after.
The Wednesday after. Okay. Yeah. So 2 Wednesdays from now, 10 p.m. Eastern draft. The 4 of us will be here, and I think we're gonna do some crazy shit.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, there's gonna be real fun.
There's a free agent period before the season, right? So if we wanted to take 20 wide receivers, we could. I
do actually think that's illegal. You need to fill out a starting lineup. Yeah.
They would try in some other players for those last guys, but
Shawn, I do just want to kind of prep you for something. So, you know the FFPC draft boards, wide receivers are of course yellow. So what we call that now when we draft a bunch of wide receivers is piss and yellow. And if we were to draft 20 wide receivers, I could say we would be painting the town yellow with piss. So, are you on board?
You don't have to say with piss, man.
I think we piss for 15 rounds, and then we take Fitzpatrick, even more rounds. And then we got to get Fitzpatrick in there late.
How do you feel about this rebrand of Zero RB drafting becoming Piss Boys?
You got to do what you have to do.
Okay. We are going to wrap it up there. Shawn, any other stuff dropping for you over on Rotoviz before the Zero RB series?
Those will be kind of the key things, doing some stuff, looking at the range of outcomes tool, going through the breakout wide receiver series, which, we obviously want those guys who are going to make the big jumps. Colin and I have been doing a bunch of listener leagues and some fun stuff on Rotoviz OT. So if you have a chance to check that out, we always appreciate it. And it's been a blast to be on. Thanks for having me.
All right. Gretch, you got articles coming out on Substack. Anything people can look forward to?
I got to finish the offseason stealing signals that I started, and then everyone wanted rankings and draft strategy and all that stuff. And really should have wrote the offseason stealing signals in the offseason. It's like the season now. But yeah, I got to write that. So those are going to be coming.
All right.
Pat, what do you got going?
Well, we're gonna have you on the NBC A Good Football Show next Tuesday, along with Leone. Going to be talking high stakes drafts, kind of do an overview of high stakes for maybe not people who are deep in the weeds, but kind of just letting the people know what you need to do to kind of get your toes dipped into the high stakes waters. And then the following Tuesday, going to have Rich Rebar on, going to be talking about some of the key hinge points in the 2021 season. So both those I'm really looking forward to. And I think next week, maybe the week after, we'll see. I'll get my my legendary upside profile applied to the early running backs.
Awesome. All right, guys, that is going to do it. Next week, we kick off our drafts. We are doing a main event draft with 2 guys from our Discord, Silas and Gormanji. That's going to be next Wednesday. And then we are off to the races. I believe we have 5 drafts within 5 days next week, all of them going to be streamed here on the channel. You can check out the pinned tweet or hop in the Discord and check the pinned messages for the full schedule. If you guys haven't become a member yet and would like to get access, you can access that via the YouTube membership below. Get in there to the Discord. That's where all of the discourse is going down. It's been a great time in there, and it's going to really ramp up here as we head to the season. So for Shawn, for Gretch, for Pat, I'm Pete. We'll see you guys next Wednesday.